Hi, my name is Peter Schiavone, Director of Veteran Services for the town of Braintree, and this is Veterans Corner. Just a brief announcement to start the show off. Braintree will be holding a Day of Remembrance on September 11th. We have a program that will begin at 9:45 in front of the town hall at Braintree, and it will include veterans organizations, public safety, and local civic and clergy. So you'll see more about it in the local newspapers. Keep an eye out for that. It will begin at 9:45 on September 11th in front of Town Hall. There's also a candlelight vigil planned in front of the firehouse at dusk of that day. And there's also in the planning stages an event at French's Common that you'll also hear more about later on. Now get to the gist of our show. I have here with me my resident historian on the Medal of Honor, Tom Grace, and he had an interesting visit with Everett Pope, a Braintree resident and Medal of Honor recipient. Everett Pope was the company commander for Company C, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, 1st Marine Division at the Battle of Peleliu in 1944. Tom had a very interesting conversation with Everett Pope, and we'll get into that. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank
Always
you
a
very
pleasure
much
to have you here.
Always an honor to be here.
And we'll get into the interview. Do you think you say a few words before we get into the
Well, we just had
conversation?
I was actually invited up to Maine to meet Mr. Pope, and I met Mr. Pope and his wife, and just the greatest people. I just had a wonderful time up there, and they made me feel absolutely at home, and I just loved his wife. She was just really just a great person, and Mr. Pope actually met his wife in 7th grade, which is a totally, it's another story in itself. I just thought it was a wonderful story. Both from Quincy, 1937 graduates of North Quincy High School. And yeah, we sat down and actually we talked about not only his Medal of Honor action, but we talked about the history he had with the Marine Corps, how he went in the Marine Corps 4 days after he graduated from Bowdoin College, which was months prior to, he graduated from OCS, I believe, a couple of months prior to Pearl Harbor. His baptism of fire, his first time he was in combat was with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, which, as you know, was a first offensive in World War II. Quite a battle in itself. But
What a great battle.
we went on to discuss Peleliu. Peleliu was in it's in the Palau Island group. It's in the shape of a large lobster claw. And one of the things that struck me the most about Peleliu was that the resiliency and the tenaciousness of the Marines was the fact that H-hour on D-Day of Peleliu was about 8:32 in the morning of 15 September 1944. The temperature was 115 degrees. I have a hard time sitting in my hammock when it's 90.
Right.
Much less to try to get into combat and fight against an enemy so fanatical as the Japanese were. There was roughly 11,000 Japanese garrison on the island under the command of Colonel Nakajawa, and this particular day there was right around the 12th, 13th, the naval bombardment, the preparatory naval gun bombardment started. So there was a complete lack of vegetation on the island. So there was really no defilade that the Marines could get behind or even in a break in combat find any shade. So they were really obviously running out of water. And what happened was, but I think it's a significant portion of the battle, even though it might be a minor point. It's definitely a minor point, but to obviously the loss of life, the catastrophic loss of life. Initially, the 1st Marine Regiment had more casualties than any Marine regiment in the history of the Marine Corps, as they did on Peleliu. But what happened was when they were calling for water, the Navy had steam cleaned a bunch of barrels, 55-gallon drum barrels that were loaded with petroleum oil. And they filled them with water and kicked them off and floated them in. Well, they didn't clean them out that well. So the poor Marines not only were sitting in zero shade, fighting in temperatures get up to 140 degrees right around noontime, 1 o'clock, but they had to drink water really that was laced with oil, and they were all getting sick, and just a tribute to the, like I say, the physical and mental toughness of these men. And I just couldn't imagine that the Japanese had been on the island. The Japanese had invaded China, and a lot of these Japanese troops that were on Peleliu at the time were seasoned combat vets that had been on China. And I couldn't imagine, we always look at the perspective of the country that we're from. We always look at the perspective of the Marines that were actually invading. You know, what did that look like? Well, can you imagine? I couldn't imagine being what the Japanese were thinking when they were thinking, we have every square inch of this island covered, yet these guys are coming into this and withering machine gun fire and automatic weapons fire and artillery, knee mortars. And you see these guys, I just think it would be more intimidating for the Japanese watching the Marines land than it would be for the Marines. I really do.
Training,
a lot of people just don't understand what it must have looked like to them.
The Marine Corps training was very, very good back then. They trained in units for long periods of time. And they were well trained, and they had that same thing that happened on Iwo Jima. They kept going straight ahead, straight ahead. Fire team assaults and advances, and they went right into a buzzsaw most of the time, but they kept going.
Oh, they kept
going, and that's a tribute to the Marine Corps, and unfortunately, there's a loss of life there, but they were fighting for their country so that we can enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy in this country today.
Oh,
those people laid their life down, literally laid their lives down. So, do we want to get into the conversation you had with them?
Absolutely.
Now we'll go to the conversation that you had with Everett Pope, former Braintree resident.
We'll talk afterwards about it as well.
Braintree Public Television is something new to me. And after the war was over, in 1947, Eleanor and I, and we've been married 60 years now, Eleanor and I moved to Braintree and lived for 20 years on Parkside Circle and had 2 sons. They went to New Lakeside School. I used to be head of the PTA at Lakeside School. They went then to Hollis Junior High, and then they both graduated from Thayer Academy. So I have a long background, as does my whole family, Tom, in Braintree. It was a wonderful place to raise kids, lots going on, nice people, nice neighborhood, good safe place for kids. And we were always very happy when we were living there. After the kids left home, went off to college, Ellen and I moved to Canton, which is a neighboring community, as you know, where we lived for another 15 years. We were both born and brought up in the South Shore. Ellen came from Wollaston. I came from the Atlantic section in Quincy. We both graduated in 1937 from North Quincy High School, where we met in the 7th grade.
Imagine that.
So we spent a lot of time at the South Shore. Married 60 years. My family, after my father retired, moved to Hingham. Eleanor's family, after her father retired, moved to Hingham. So we've known the South Shore pretty well over the years, and I'm glad to be a part of this new facility that the town is running.
Oh, we're so proud to have the history of the fact that 2 Medal of Honor recipients resided in Braintree.
Well, we of course knew the McGillivrys very well. Charlie and Esther raised a wonderful family. And over the years, as time went on, I was in the banking business in Boston, and they used to come to me, and I'd finance their houses. So I felt I knew the McGillivray family and the McGillivray kids very well. And I'm sorry, of course, that Charlie and Esther are gone, and I'm sorry that one of their daughters died quite unexpectedly a year or so ago, I guess it was. And now Braintree, because we lived in Braintree before there was a South Shore Plaza.
It's going back a ways.
Our property used to go down to what was known as Braintree Dam. While we didn't do much swimming down there, it was there, and it made the whole neighborhood a nice place to be. So, don't know whether you want to talk about World War II or what would you like to talk?
Right after you graduated from North Quincy High, you went to Bowdoin College.
I went to Bowdoin College, and I was induced to go there quite properly by a teacher at North Quincy High School, an assistant principal, in those days, you decided where you wanted to go, and then you went. Your family had $300, you go to Bowdoin, and my family had $300. So I went to Bowdoin, spent 4 years there. Wonderful school, wonderful college. I've been very active since. We'll talk about this later in the affairs of Bowdoin College. But as I was telling you a few minutes ago, 4 days after I graduated from Bowdoin, I was in the Marine Corps. In the spring of that year, this gentleman appeared on the campus, and he was wearing a dark blue jacket and light blue pants with a red stripe down the side, and I said, my golly, I'm going to have me one of those. And it was a long time before I ever got a pair of undress blues, I'll tell you. But, so 4 days after I left the college, I was in the Marine Corps. I was commissioned at Quantico in the late fall of '41, and then a few weeks thereafter Pearl Harbor occurred, and things changed. Things speeded up, believe me. And I went to North Carolina to join the 1st Marine Division, and in June of '42, excuse me, in June of '42, the 1st Marine Division went overseas. Stopped briefly in New Zealand, and then we went on to a place called Guadalcanal. And I was in the second wave that landed on Guadalcanal.
Brutal warfare.
It was a very unpleasant place to be. And the Navy, for whatever their reasons were, decided they didn't want to hang around there, so they left.
They left all the Marines.
Left the Marines ashore, where we stayed for 4 months under some very difficult conditions. But this was, as you know, the first offensive action that the United States took in World War II. And we had to get that airfield. It seems to me in the Marine Corps I spent most of my time capturing airfields. But we had to be sure that airfield did not get operative, because from there the Japanese could have bombed Australia. And it was very important that we went ashore and we held the island against tremendous Japanese attempts to take it away from us. And for 4 months we really lived on the front lines. Much of the time living on captured Japanese rice. I don't eat rice anymore.
No, I don't blame you. Well, the rice was infested, wasn't it?
So from there, then we went back to Australia for a few months to train, refit, and get organized again. Went up to the eastern part of New Guinea, spent a little bit of time in the mainland of New Guinea, and then went across and landed on Cape Gloucester, where there was an airstrip we had to take, and we took it, of course. Came back, trained a little bit more, and got replacements, and then went off to Peleliu, which is an island that it's just not really anywhere. It's 1,000 miles southwest of Guam, about 500 miles east of Mindanao in the Philippines. And the 1st Marine Division, again, was told to land and take that island, secure the airfield, and we did. Casualties were terrible. I still have bad feelings about it, of course. But the thing that I don't feel badly about is the memory of those brave young Marines who fought on that island. I feel badly about those who gave their lives, and many of them did.
They gave their lives for us, for people.
No question of it. Eleanor and I went back to the island of Peleliu a few years on the 50th anniversary of the landing. Eleanor always said that I wouldn't take her the first time I went there. So I took her on the second time. And there were tears shed. It was not maudlin, but it was hard to realize that this beautiful island, the jungle has returned. And if you have a short memory, it's a lovely place, sandy beaches and so forth. But we don't have short memories. I did indeed pay my respects to those young men who gave their lives for this country on that terrible island.
Young kids, teenagers.
Oh, 18, 19, maybe 20. The sergeants were 20. They were.
Yourself, you were only 25 when you went.
Yeah, that's right. I was. Yeah. So these were young people, the flower of American youth, if you will, who fought for this country.
All the families that never were.
Right. So I was obviously lucky to get off. I landed on that island with 235 men. And when we came down from the hill 5 days later after that action that's described in my citation, there were 8 of us. And why I am alive today, I have no idea. Why they gave me the medal, I have no idea.
And this is the Medal of Honor that you received,
Yes, yeah.
you earned on that day. It was actually a 2-day affair.
See, whoops, it started to come. Have to be careful because it tends to come apart.
September 19th, 20th,
That's right.
1944.
The medal is inscribed on the back with the name, rank, serial number, and that sort of thing. Can I tell you a light story or two for just a minute about the
Absolutely,
medal?
love to hear it.
Recipients of the Medal of Honor, there are now cases, 2 cases, are having a little bit of trouble when they go through security lines at airports.
Oh, imagine that.
Your friend Joe Foss, whom you spoke of, had a terrible time because the people who ran the security machines decided that this was a dangerous thing to have. It has fairly sharp edges.
Imagine that.
Joe Foss was on his way to address the graduating class at West Point, but he had a terrible time getting aboard. And most recently, the oldest member of our society, who earned his medal on December 7th in Pearl Harbor, and who is now 94 years old, was traveling and the same thing happened to him. He tried to go through security in an airport. People didn't recognize the medal. What they thought a 94-year-old man was going to do with a piece of metal, I don't know, but he had a tough time. Now I'm going to fly out of here in a few days, and I hope the security people know what the Medal of Honor is.
The Medal of Honor is. It's amazing that more people don't know what the Medal of Honor is.
Well, it is. It is.
Mr. Foss, I spoke with him in length. He told me that they're pretty much taking history out of the schools because
Yes,
the liberals do not want you to learn
we
about
are concerned that there
what
is
took place.
not an adequate course, perhaps, in the teaching of American history. We must not forget that we are engaged in another war. Very different.
Absolutely.
Very dangerous. Heavy casualties have been incurred. We'll soon celebrate, that's not the right word, is it? We'll soon remember September 11 as the year anniversary occurs. And this nation is working hard with the security of its homeland. I do have to say something. I hope this won't be concerned as being political, Tommy, but I believe we have to be careful. We have to remember that over the years, some people have given up freedom for peace. And the history of that is that you soon lose both. You cannot barter away your freedom in exchange for false promises of peace. So we must remember that
Great point.
we have a constitution, we must adhere to it, we must see that the rights that we have enjoyed, for which we fought, are continually granted, watched over and preserved, and not bartered away in exchange for some few minutes of peace, which would then lead to a complete disaster. I think.
Sometimes the liberals, I think, forget that freedom was never free.
That's right.
It was
a lot of people died
paid for
for it.
in
A lot
the
of
blood of
people died for it,
young men,
yeah.
including your own. You were wounded on Pelham.
Yes. Not
Severely, but
no,
it was.
if you read a book or two about Pelham, the story is told that after the action subsided, I went down to the battalion aid station, borrowed a pair of pliers, and pulled the shrapnel out.
I did read that.
But so it wasn't very serious. It's quite rare, but it has happened that a recipient of the Medal of Honor receives the medal without having been wounded, without, in effect, having received a Purple Heart.
I believe Colonel Barnum was one of them, correct?
Very few. Well, I don't know whether he was. Mark Barnum was blown up and ended up under 10 feet of Vietnamese mud, so maybe that counts as being wounded. But it happens very rarely, but it's not, there is precedent for it. Some have received the Medal of Honor without being wounded, but it's not usual.
Not usual.
It's not usual.
The Medal of Honor, obviously, for the people that don't know, is the highest military decoration one can earn for valor. You don't win the Medal of Honor. You earn the Medal of Honor. You are a recipient of the Medal of Honor, not a Medal of Honor winner.
That's the word we like to use. Those of us who have received the Medal of Honor prefer to talk in terms of being a recipient. The word win is not appropriate. It's not a lottery, for instance. And it's not a contest in which you strive to see if you could be the winner. That just doesn't happen. People who receive the Medal of Honor, by and large, are ordinary people who, at a moment when they were severely stressed, were able to overcome fear, if you will, and pursue the task which they had been given, or the task as they saw it, and achieved success, if you will. Many recipients, of course, of the Medal of Honor were killed in the action that took place. Give or take, half the Medals of Honor are awarded posthumously. And you never forget that there were other people fighting in some of the terrible wars we've had who were entitled to receive a Medal of Honor, but nobody saw what they did, nobody was there, they were killed, the action reports were obscured, and you just can never forget the fact that you are privileged to have received it, be alive, and there are many others who have received it and were killed, or who didn't receive it in the first place. It's a humbling experience. It's been said that it is harder to wear the Medal of Honor than it was to receive it in the first place. Now, I don't quite agree with that. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but there is a point to be made. And most of the men who have received the Medal of Honor wear it gracefully. This is a humble group. It's not a group that brags or talks loudly or tells everybody how wonderful they are. It's quite to the contrary. Recipients of the Medal of Honor tend to be quiet, normal people, proud of what they've done, prouder of what others have done. And there's not a lot of bravado involved here. There isn't any at all, really. Just a nice bunch of guys who were willing to put it on the line for their country when their country called.
That's something I can attest to. I've never been treated so well as I have been by the recipients of the Medal of Honor. Just today is a prime example. I mean, you invited me up.
Well,
Your wife invited me up and sit down in your beautiful living room up in Maine and talk about what took place.
We now, for background, to our friends in Braintree, and we still have friends, of course, in Braintree, we're spending 3 months a year in Maine, in Belgrade Lakes, where we've had a summer home for 40 years. And in the other 9 months of the year, we have a retirement home in a retirement community in Florida. And to our friends in Belgrade and Braintree, come see us. We'd like to hear from you.
Let's get back to Peleliu for a bit.
Sure.
Peleliu, D-Day on Peleliu was September 15th,
Yes.
1944.
Yeah.
A little bit about the temperature that day.
Oh, it was 115 degrees.
115 degrees. At about 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah. The landing was terribly opposed as we came in the amphibian tractors which had been used to crawl over the reef.
We couldn't use the Higgins boats at the time.
No, you
because of
couldn't get
the
across the
coral
reef. Yeah. You take the Higgins boats up to the reef, then you transfer into an amphibian tractor which would then crawl over the reef and take you the short remaining distance to shore. But I remember when we came in that morning, I could see about 10 fires burning brightly along the beach. And for a minute or two I said, gee, that's pretty good. We've set things on fire, until I realized that those were 10 landing craft that had been hit by the Japanese men, obviously killed. And the landing was very seriously opposed.
The Japanese had sighted just about every square inch of the island.
Japanese had occupied the island for 10, 15 years, knowing that their airfield might need to be defended. Peleliu is an island in what is now the Republic of Palau. It was for many years a Japanese trust between World War I and World War II, and the Japanese had the slightest problem in fortifying it. which they were not supposed to do, but they did it, and they did it well. There were about 11,000 Japanese entrenched in that island, in the hills, the mountains, the coral ridges. While the numbers can never quite be verified, within about 11,000. The Japanese, of course, all died.
They were told to fight to the death.
Sure.
And they told you're going to die for your country.
Right.
Take 10 of them with you, correct?
The battlefield of Pelro, which is to which we went back, I spoke earlier, is literally covered with the remains of dead Japanese. The American dead, of course, were removed in 1947 and taken to cemeteries, as the parents or the relatives of those who died wished. A lot of them went to the Punch Bowl in Hawaii. A lot of them were brought home. The Japanese never made any attempt to repatriate their dead. There is now a shrine on the island, a Shinto shrine, and the Japanese come there and pray for their dead, but they've made no attempt to repatriate the bones of those who fell. So it's really quite humbling to walk and realize the terrible, terrible slaughter that took place on that island.
Your regimental commander was a pretty famous individual himself,
Yes, he
correct?
was. Found in Chesty Puller, sort of an icon in the Marine Corps. During what the Marine Corps refers to sort of irreverently as the Banana Wars, Nicaragua, Haiti, and places like that, between World War I and World War II, Puller learned how to fight. He was a remarkable small unit commander. He won all in his career 5 Navy crosses. He did not win the Medal of Honor, and he did not earn the Medal of Honor. It was not rewarded to him, and he always felt, to be blunt, that it should have been. So when I was nominated by my battalion commander for the Medal of Honor, Puller didn't like it, and disapproved it, actually. But the division commander, the corps commander, the commandant of the Marine Corps all saw fit to approve it, and but Puller went on to have a continually successful career in the Marine Corps, fought very bravely in Korea, and retired as a Marine Corps Lieutenant General. He's not living now, but his name still commands a great deal of respect in the Marine Corps. And Puller's idea was there's no such thing as tactics, you just go straight up the hill.
Right. Right. Speaking of which, 19 and 20 of September of '44, you were ordered to take Hill 100.
That's right. These are meters, so Hill 100 is a 300 or 400 foot hill.
300 or 400 foot hill.
Not a very large hill.
No?
But it was
But
part
it
of a
becomes
chain.
very large when you have
Part of a
quite
chain
few,
of high ground that
people
we
shooting
just
at you.
felt we had to have. And we were ordered to take the hill, and we did. We remained overnight on the hill. A lot of counterattacks, a lot of hand-to-hand combat on that hill. But what finally happened was this. If those of you who have been in the military know that a unit can fight for a couple of days without food. Depending on the climate and the tropics, it can fight for a few hours without water. But it can't fight for 5 minutes without ammunition. And we were up there without ammunition. There was no way to get anything to us. We called and hoped, but it did not happen. So when dawn broke out, and then we were hit by a company-sized force of, I don't know how many, 100 or so men, I guess. There were 8 of us left. They just pushed us off. And we went tumbling, head over heels, down the hill. My dead on that hill were not buried for 13 days. Nobody else got up there for 13 days.
Marines will always fight to get their dead back.
Yeah.
That's one of the things the Marine Corps will do.
13 days for anybody else got up there. Anyhow, that memory lies with me, stays with me. I think about it a lot.
And it's
And I'm
just,
very proud to be a recipient of the Medal of Honor, of course. Very proud. We have a society. Now, everybody has a society, of course. Well, there is a group of us called the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. There are now about 140 of us alive. Charlie McGilvery was president of the society at one point. Our headquarters are on the Carrier Yorktown in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Yorktown is moored in concrete. It's never going to go anywhere again. We have a nice museum down there. If you're ever in that area, you have to stop in and see it. It's a museum of artifacts
It's a wonderful place.
that have to do with the Medal of Honor. And, Society's going to meet again late in September in Shreveport, Louisiana. And there'll probably be 100 of us there. Of 140 of us who are alive, many are not able to travel. But
you'll be attending?
I'll be attending, as will Eleanor. And I have been, but I am no longer an officer of the society. I've served on the board and so forth for quite a few years. But we'll be going there. There'll be other people from the greater Boston area. Tom Kelly from South Boston will be there. Tom Hudner, who lives in Concord, will be there, I know. Those are the immediate Massachusetts group that I know and remember. So it'll be an interesting group, interesting gathering. And as I mentioned earlier, with a great show of respect for each other. And a group that is very quietly proud of what, as a group, these men have done. Why do I always keep saying men? Well, have we got time for an amusing story here?
Sure we do.
Has a woman ever received a Medal of Honor? Well, in my usual hard-hitting and forthright way, I'll say, well, maybe, perhaps, who knows? The story is this. Back in the mid-19th century, 1855, Dr. Mary Walker was indeed a doctor. She was an MD. It wasn't any fake degree, and she went to a medical school and she received the Doctor of Medicine degree. And then the Civil War broke out, and she wanted, as other doctors were doing, to join the Union Army as a surgeon. Well, of course, that was laughable, a woman joining an army. So she was never commissioned as an officer of the Union Army, but she signed and served as what they then called a contract surgeon, which, although the doctor was not an officer, he would go forward on the front lines, and she did just that and cared for the wounded. At one point, she was so close to the front line, she was captured by the Confederates.
Wow.
And then she was exchanged for a Union officer, for a Confederate officer, which naturally gave more and more weight to her argument that she too should be an officer, but she never was. And at the end of the war, she went to see the Secretary of War, Secretary Stanton, and asked that she be given a Medal of Honor. It was the only decoration in those days. There was no other decoration. And so she was given the only decoration that was available to give a person who had served bravely, which was the Medal of Honor. Now later, that decoration was reviewed and was taken away from her. And she was no longer an official recipient. She was still alive. She lived until 1918. And she wore that medal pinned to her garb for every day of her life until she died. And in 1977, a review board again reviewed the case of Dr. Mary Walker, and her name was reinstated, and the fact that she is a recipient was confirmed, and she now appears on any official roll of recipients of the Medal of Honor as one, and as the only female to have received.
Imagine that.
So there is one recipient of the Medal
One
of Honor.
recipient who's a female. There's some of the stories that you hear about how different people earn the Medal of Honor. It's just, it's incredible. And you know, basically even on, what a lot of people don't understand because they see in the movies really don't, for lack of a better term, do war justice. When you were on top of Hill 100, how close to the Japanese were you?
Well, I don't know, I grabbed them, and they grabbed me, so I guess you can't
That's pretty
get any
close.
closer than that.
That's pretty close.
We were, one of the sides of Hill 100 was very, very precipitous. And one thing that we could do, if you get your hands on somebody, is to throw them off the cliff. And since we didn't have any weapons, didn't have any ammunition, you did a lot of that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of it. But that was one thing you could do. The other thing we did, and people sometimes think this was absurd, but we threw stones. Coral chunks, throw it. Now that leads you to believe that we must have been idiots. But what we were doing in effect was throwing a hunk of stone instead of a grenade. And it would come bouncing into the middle of the attacking Japanese, and they would not know whether it was a grenade or not. And it would slow them down, believe me. And then, after you'd done that a few times, you'd use one of your few remaining grenades and throw it. So if you hear a story about Pope throwing stones at the Japanese, you just take that with a grain of salt. That's why we did it.
And the thing is that at the time, on top of that hill, all the younger kids up there were looking to you for leadership.
Well,
You were in this Medal of Honor because you were their leader. When things break down, people look to their
I was
leader.
being paid a salary, to be blunt, to serve as an officer of the United States Marine Corps, and I had
Quite a
a
responsibility.
lot of responsibility. I like to talk in schools, and one of the things school kids sometimes ask, and their eyes are wide open, and they say, were you scared when you went up that hill? And the answer that I give to them, and that I would give to you now, is sure you're scared. Anybody with half the Japanese army shooting at them is stupid not to be afraid. But you're afraid of something more than getting hit. You're afraid of not doing your duty. You're afraid you might not do your duty to the Marine Corps and to the men who have been entrusted to you. And you owe those men everything. And that's what you were afraid of, is that maybe I won't lead these men correctly. That, yes, you are afraid. You are afraid.
And not only the responsibility of being their company commander, you were not only, you didn't have the luxury of just worrying about yourself.
Oh, that's
You've got to worry about everybody else up there. And you probably, knowing the kind of man you are, put yourself last. Worried about everybody
Marine
else
Corps
first.
is a good teacher. The Marine Corps tells you how to do these things, not necessarily in a situation like that, but you're trained by the Marine Corps to lead men in battle, and they expect that you will do it.
And when you get in the middle of a battle like that, and you're having that type of an enemy that isn't afraid to die, it seems.
Oh, that's correct. We took,
it was honorable for them to die for the
we took, on an island like Pelican, this sounds bad, and I will explain it as best I can. We took no prisoners. They took no prisoners. There was no point in expecting to be captured, you know, be sent off to Tokyo to meet the emperor. So I guess I was typical. I obviously had a pistol on my hip, but there was always one round left in that pistol, because you weren't about to be captured.
You did not want to be captured by the Japanese.
So it was sort of a mutual covenant, if you will.
And I guess all's fear and love and war, but on the canal, didn't they, wasn't there a patrol on the canal that got caught trying to...
Yes, the Getchy Patrol, early in the land days of the landing, were told by a native that there was some Japanese out in Point Cape Esperance that wanted to surrender, and they very foolishly, we were not then as experienced as we later became, sent out some people in a landing craft to see if they wouldn't surrender. And of course it was all a ruse. The men in the landing craft, including some very high-ranking Marines who should not have been there, were slaughtered. So you learn slow, but you learn good. You don't do things like that. But anyhow, let's just conclude with, let me say one more thing. There's a lot of talk, always will be, I presume, about the use of the atom bomb, the bombs that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One of them was dropped by a good friend of mine, a classmate from North Quincy High School, by the way, Charlie Sweeney, who commanded the plane that dropped the bomb in Nagasaki. And there is no doubt in my mind that the use of those weapons saved millions of lives.
On both sides.
Both sides. The Japanese civilian casualties would have been immense. I was scheduled, would have commanded a Marine Corps battalion on the landing on Kyushu, the southern Japanese island, on November 1st of 1945. The war ended 2 or 3 months before that. But there would have been 150,000 Marines and Army would have gone in on the landing beaches on Kyushu on November 1st. And the slaughter would have been terrible amongst both the Japanese and the Americans. So the decision to drop those bombs ended the war, and among other minor matters, it saved my life. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. It was
We are a better country because of it.
difficult and absolutely correct decision. So for that, I am very thankful that the terrible decision was made.
A lot of families now are here today because of that decision.
No
On
question,
both sides.
no question, no question. Well, I want to thank you for coming and visiting us in
Oh,
our
it's quite an honor.
home in Maine, and
We are a better nation because of you
Yeah,
and your actions.
you're very kind, and I'm lucky to be here, and nice to see you here. Nice to see my friends in Braintree. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Pope.
Well, Tom, that was quite an interview, or conversation, as you like to put it, with Everett Pope. He's a very humble man, as we can see. And I want to say that the way he ended his discussion there about the lives that were saved by dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I don't think I would be here today because my father was in the Pacific, the United States Army, waiting to go into that battle, and who knows what would have happened. The casualties would have been immense. So those bombs saved a lot of American lives. What's your feelings on talking to Everett Pope?
Well, actually,
how do you describe that?
to actually sit in the same room with a legend, you know, it really kind of made me speechless. And as we spoke, really the only, I guess, emotion that I had that was greater than an overwhelming sense of awe and admiration was my profound sense of gratitude to this man for what he did, for what he went through. I know, and as he said in the conversation, that it was 13 days before anybody could get his dead off the hill. And as you saw, he called them his dead, and they were. So, really, and as I look at it again, I get a little emotional because it, as I sit there with him, I know he thinks about it quite often. And, this country this country is a stronger country because of Mr. Everett Pope. And I can honestly say that I am a better man, I am a richer man for having met and sat with this legend. And that's what he is. He's a legend. He's an American legend. He's a patriot. And him and his wife, Mrs. Pope, they just made me feel so at home. And really, it just the type of battle that they had to fight. And he was so modest as the way he described how one earns a Medal of Honor. I mean, in hellacious conditions, he was able to think on his feet, if you will, and perform above and beyond what was ever expected of him. I mean, this Hill 100 actually wasn't a true hill. The maps were wrong. The hill was actually the tip of a finger with a little bit of a higher precipice not too far away, so that there was always high ground ahead of him, firing on his position. And he basically stayed up there to try to protect the other outfits from counterattacks. Like I say, the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marine Regiments landed abreast on September 15th, and this happened just a couple days later. It was just 4.5 days to 5 days later that that this Mr. Pope's penetration occurred, and you know, just the it's difficult to put into words what he went through.
The way he described it too, he was very wanted to be sure that you realize that he was responsible for his men.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's hard enough in a battle like that to just take care of yourself, and then he was thinking of his men, his 90 other men or whatever, how many he had to take care of. He was really responsible, though. He felt a responsibility, and that's what a leader is. A Marine Corps officer is trained to lead. Let me just read a little bit of his citation to you, so you know a little bit about, folks out there know a little bit about what he did. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as commanding officer of Company C during action against enemy Japanese forces on Peleliu Island, September 19th and 20th, 1944. Subjected to point-blank cannon fire, which caused heavy casualties and badly disorganized his company while assaulting a steep coral hill. Captain Pope rallied his men and gallantly led them to the summit in the face of machine gun, mortar, and sniper fire. Forced by widespread hostile attack to deploy the remnants of his company thinly in order to hold the ground won, and with the machine guns out of order and insufficient water and ammunition, he remained on the exposed hill with 12 men and 1 wounded officer, determined to hold through the night. They were attacked continuously with grenades, machine guns, and rifles from 3 sides. He and his valiant men fiercely beat back or destroyed the enemy, resorting to hand-to-hand combat as the supply of ammunition dwindled, and still maintained his lines with his 8 remaining riflemen. His valiant leadership against devastating odds while protecting units below from heavy Japanese attack reflects the highest credit upon Captain Pope and the U.S. Naval Service. So he saved lives of not only the men he was in command of, but the units around him.
Absolutely.
And I got a kick out of his hand-to-hand combat. They were grabbing me, I was grabbing them. That's unbelievable.
Well, he's by far the most modest man I've ever met. You know, he just, it's just amazing that they don't make them like that anymore, I don't think. They really don't. I apologize. I become speechless when I get tears in my eyes because for what he had to go through that day, losing all those men. I mean, he walked on well, he didn't walk on a Peleliu. He stormed the beaches of Peleliu with company 245 Marines. 8 walked off. I mean, that says it all. I mean, the 1st Marine Regiment suffered, like I said earlier, the highest amount of casualties of any Marine regiment in the history of the Marine Corps. Proportionately, the amount of casualties on Peleliu was greater proportionately than the amount of casualties on Iwo Jima, a more well-known island than Peleliu. Right. You know, in other words, the amount of Marines that hit Peleliu compared to the amount of Marines that hit Iwo Jima, there was a greater number of casualties proportionally. It was a hellacious island. The Japanese had kind of changed their tactics a bit. They weren't getting drunk on sake and doing the bonsai charges as often as they were. They were using their ammunition sparingly. They would only use their ammunition when they had clear fields of fire. They wanted, similar to Iwo Jima, they wanted those Marines on that beach. When they got on that beach, that's when the fire started.
They all zeroed in. Well, they were there for so long, and they fortified those islands. All those islands were so fortified, and they had them zeroed in. They had their guns. All they had to do was fire them. They knew where they were firing. They knew where they were going with their rounds. And
well, it's men like
big
that.
Advantage.
It's men like that. That's the reason that lesser men wouldn't have been able to take that island. And it's men like Captain Everett Pope. And like I say, I just had a great time with Mr. Pope and Mrs. Pope, and it was just
well, it's almost like you were part of history there. You became
without a doubt. I mean,
part of history talking to him, and he's all the Medal of Honor recipients that I've met all seem to be similar to him. They're humble. They all show a care and a love for their fellow man, and that's what makes them heroes. I mean, that's what makes them do heroic things, because they care about people, and they save lives, and that's what recipients of Medal of Honor usually receive the Medal of Honor because they've saved lives. And you can see that in all the ones that I've met. Incidentally, with September 11th coming up, last year at this time, Medal of Honor Society's reunion was in Boston.
Sure.
And they were scheduled to come in just before September 11th, and they had to be turned away because of what happened on September 11th. Some of them were arriving that day in Boston. Of course, their flights were canceled. And they eventually had their reunion here in Boston in October, and I was privileged to go to that, and I sat and talked with a number of Medal of Honor recipients, and they all are like Everett Pope. They're all humble guys who made sacrifices, and they'll talk to you about it, just like we're talking now, and just a great society of men. And I wish that the young people today would look up to them and learn more about them. Hopefully this show will help our young people in our town learn more about Medal of Honor recipients, not just from this town, but from all parts of our great country. And today I want to thank Tom for doing what he did, going up to Maine and having a conversation with Captain Everett Pope, former Braintree resident. And that concludes our show for today, and we'll be back again. We'll be talking about Medal of Honor recipients again. Tom will be back, and we'll continue to do our show on the history of veterans from Braintree. But we always remember the sacrifices of Everett Pope and his men, and some of them who made the ultimate sacrifice. Always remember that freedom is not free.